Okay, welcome again. Hi, y'all. I'm West. I think you all know that. Yeah, everybody here knows me. I'm going to give us a little context and orientation and guide us in a prayer um, before we get started. So, an overview of this call is it's a 90-minute call. Um, we try to keep it to right about 90 minutes just to honor everybody's time. And so I'm going to give this overview. I'll turn it over to Kent. Kent is going to introduce Karin, and then Karin's going to give us her spiel. And we're going to leave time at the end for discussion. And there might be some space for discussion in the midst of her presentation, too. We'll see how it goes. Also, fun fact, I think this is our first presenter on the Sharing the Path series who is from the Asheville area. So myself and Kent and Karin, we're all coming to you from the Asheville area and the TOTOH team. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, so now a little bit about the culture of our calls. We aim to cultivate co-creatorship as we share the path of the open heart. We're practicing shared discourse and collective intelligence. So, as always on these calls, we're not necessarily aiming to all end up with the same viewpoint or all agree, right? Like Karin isn't going to try to convince us of her position and we all are trying to buy in. It may resonate for us, it may not. So please take what resonates and let go what doesn't. And the same being said for if you have an opposing viewpoint, for instance, to what Karin presents or what anyone else shares, we do ask that that is shared in the spirit of free will. So again, not to try to convince anyone else of your perspective, but rather to allow varying perspectives and collective intelligence. Yeah, so we're aiming to connect with ourselves, our own truth, connect with our other selves and the truth that's being spoken there, and to listen for resonance when there is something that's being shared that may not be exactly the same as yours, to still listen for what feels right and resonant and alive for that other person. Okay, I think that's all of the culture pieces. And now let's take a moment to settle in and have a little prayer. Connect with the gifts that are available to all of us all the time. I invite us to call in specifically our guides and our allies. Thank you for being with us. All of the invisible support that sometimes we call intuition, sometimes we call angels, all of the goodness that surrounds us all the time. Thank you for being with us on this call, supporting this conversation to be productive, to be connecting, to be beneficial and of service to the planet. And as always, thank you to the one infinite creator at the center of all things. Amen. Now to Kent.
Thank you, West. So as West already mentioned, Karin is a beloved member of our local community here, which we call TOTOH, Temple of the Open Heart. And TOTOH is centered in a neighborhood called Riverlight Village. And Karin was actually the first person to live there in her house, which she calls Betsy. And then the other TOTOH members settled around her and built a little community there. I don't live there. West and Karin live there. I live about 30 minutes away. Now, Karin met one of the other members of TOTOH already 25 years ago. That was Jess, who I don't know if anybody here has met Jess except us. They met in Missouri and then they reconnected in Nashville and started building their little community. Karin grew up in a Catholic family in Staten Island. She studied early childhood education on a running scholarship and eventually worked her way up to a master's degree in education. She has studied and worked with homeschooling, the Reggio Emilia approach to learning, the law of one material, radical honesty, nonviolent communication, and most recently, somatic meditation, theta healing, and internal family systems. And one interesting thing she mentioned to me was that she picked up IFS when she started having panic attacks, and none of the other modalities that she was using was helping her. So she started working with IFS, and that actually helped her with her panic attacks. And she says it's still the only modality she has in her toolbox that helps her with the panic attacks and helps her regulate them. And then I'm gonna quote West here, something beautiful she wrote. Karin brings to everything she touches a blend of warmth, clarity, and fierce devotion to wholeness. For children, for community, for her marriage, and for herself. And I also want to mention that she's a really good hugger. So none of you are going to get to experience that, but if you ever meet her, maybe she will grant you a hug. All right, Karin, your turn.
Oh, that was so funny. Um, that was a great way to end my intro.
Mhm.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So, internal family systems. I like to call it IFS. That's my new nickname for it. And you're welcome
Okay.
to use that if you want. But I will refer to it this evening as IFS for shorthand. Um, yeah, that's a great intro, Kent, because just thinking about what the impact of IFS has been in my world. I had a pretty urgent need. I was thinking about this earlier. It was like a choice point of I felt like I needed to find a new tool or I needed to start some sort of anxiety medication. And that was very significant for me because I really am not very open to that idea of taking that kind of pharmaceutical. Um, so grateful when I tried IFS for panic and it worked well. Um, and what part of my story did I want to share about that? Um, yeah, I guess I'll start with um, a little bit of my overview of exploring that. There's a book called Self Therapy that I really recommend, and I was going to actually show the book. Jay Early. Anyhow, Self Therapy. We can put it in the little um, notes on the side. So self therapy is a real kind of DIY hacking of IFS that I came across that a fellow healer had recommended. And I started meetup groups and just put out like a call to see who in the area wanted to study it. And lots of therapists showed up because it's most often used in one-on-one practice in therapy. There's really not a lot of people that practice IFS on their own. But that book, which did come out a while ago, has really made it possible for people to explore it on their own. So that is part of the like larger conversation that I was wanting to have around exploring how is it working and how and the experiments that my husband Alexander and I have done. We've started a few different groups studying IFS, practicing with the intention of starting a community where people could show up and trade sessions outside of professional counseling services, kind of like the way the co-counseling model is working. Anyhow, so that's a larger explanation. One of the groups that started, and the group that has been going the longest, our first group, has now moved into using parts work, IFS work, in our family constellations. So we're constellating the parts. And that's if there's interest in that later, we can jump into that. And if people want to explore that, that's been really some of the most exciting outcomes for me has been that work because you really kind of get to see how the parts are all talking to each other and working together without um, in a kind of removed way. You know, it's like, oh, this is what's appearing. This is really neat stuff. Yeah, so there's that. So my personal journey has started with anxiety and panic attacks and has just gone on deeper and deeper into deeper levels of using parts work to heal old trauma, become more in my body. Um, and I will say, like, for me personally, the more that I come into my body and feel what's going on with all my parts, the more that comes up, if that makes sense. I'm like stirring the pot. And the pot was stirred. It was time to do that deep work, which isn't a reason why I sort of give a little bit of a disclaimer with IFS of I don't think it's for everybody. I really think it's for people who, um, like for most people, they want to do this work with a therapist. But for me, a big part of what was so great about this self therapy practice and learning how to do it on my own and with the support of my friends in trading sessions was that I needed to do it all the time. With the amount of anxiety I was working with, I was doing sessions every day. And, just it was impractical to do that with a therapist. I'd see a therapist once a week. And I did have a bunch of sessions with therapists who are trained in IFS. And that was supportive and it boosted my work. And I needed more than that. So, this is a really great tool for someone who has the capacity to do deep inner work and wants something in addition to working with a therapist or outside of that if they're dealing with big stuff. So, that was the first part. Um, so, this isn't going to so much be an introduction to IFS because this is not enough time to introduce the basics, but um, there's lots of great videos online and that explain IFS. But there is the concept of self, right? And self leadership. I love self leadership. I love redefining that phrase. That's really exciting to me. It's like I'm self led, right? If self is my center, and I want to invite everybody actually in this moment to just take a moment to feel what's it like to sit in self? What's it like? What are the qualities of self for you? Your center, your higher self, your wisdom, whatever you call it. What's it like when you feel most alive? So just taste that right now in this moment. What does self feel like? This is a good way to sort of explore the topic. Yeah, do you all want to just unmute yourself and just call out if there's a word or a few words just to just express what self feels like in this moment?
Expansive.
Yeah.
Joy.
What'd you say? Sorry, you were muted.
Joy.
Joy. Yay. Joy. Thank you, Landon. Oh, that was Benjamin. Sorry.
Like an ocean.
Mm, yeah.
I'd say like a rainbow.
Mm, great. Wonderful. And then just take a moment to track what, as you're just feeling into your body and you're sitting in self, can you notice anything that feels like it's not self? That's not that quality of that you just described. It could be a physical sensation, it could be an emotion, it could be a thought. And as you notice those things, feel free to call them out as well if you're comfortable doing that. I feel a little tension in my low back, a little bit of fear, perhaps.
I got tension and tremors in my neck.
Great.
Difference.
What'd you say, Landon?
I said like boredom or indifference.
Great.
Just like
Great.
a common for me.
Yeah, that's a great one to notice. Great. So there's self and there's what's not self. That's like the basic rundown of IFS. Is noticing that, noticing when self is driving or when other parts that are not self are driving. Um, Sometimes those parts are wounded parts, and the basic framework of IFS is like healing those wounded parts. So it's likely, especially when it's like the quality of what you're feeling that's not self is very different. Like if it's like open and expansive, and then the part, what you're feeling in your body is constrictive, that's likely a protector or a wounded part that is talking, wanting your attention. And so this work is just giving that part a voice box and talking with it and tending it and asking it what it needs. It's pretty fun stuff. And I think there's a lot of crossover with other modalities. Um, Part of what I was wanting to explore and share is like what's different than other modalities in my experience. And when I was learning about parts and realized, okay, like right now, this tension in my back, if I explore that and I'm talking to that part, when we get to talking to the wounded part, which there are steps to sort of get there, that wounded part is frozen in time. This is one of the coolest things that that I've been exploring through this process is like something happened likely in childhood. My I didn't have the most children don't have the tools to process an emotion that's more than their window of tolerance, and it gets stored in the body. But when it gets stored, that child doesn't watch you grow up. It leaves the timeline. So when you go back to talk to it and you say, "How old do you think I am?" and "How old are you?" You know, if it says it's 3 years old, it usually thinks I'm about 5 or 4, right? Like I look a little bigger. So neat. And it really has helped explain so much to me of like, do you ever have that experience of feeling like taken over by something? I don't mean possession. I mean like, you're in a healthy habit and things are going good, and then all of a sudden you're doing like some habit you just are that you think is unhealthy or negative or something you don't enjoy. Something sort of takes over. For me, one of the ways that would show up is there's lots of ways, honestly. But one of the things that would take over, a wounded part that would come forward and take over was a little bit self-destructive. Like I would just do things that I knew were unsafe. And if I'd stopped to think about it, I'd be like, that's unsafe, right? But I'd find myself doing that. And if I got really present, I'd be like, I don't know who did that. That wasn't me. That didn't feel like me. And it doesn't. It's a part from the past that's frozen in time. So this is one of my favorite findings that IFS has like revealed about trauma is how, and this is I've been curious and I keep asking these parts as they show up and asking other people's parts who don't know anything about IFS when we start doing work together. How old are you? How old do you think I am? And they don't see anything about my current life or the person's current life. They are stuck in that moment, and that moment is a loop for them. So it makes sense that when things in your life trigger a wounded part, it comes forward, it takes over, and you blend with it. This is my other favorite part of IFS is blending and unblending. Blending is when like a wounded part takes over. For me, that would be a extreme example of blending is a panic attack or a big depression spiral, right? Or when someone's so angry and they can't get out of it, they're shaking for days. Another example is shock, when someone goes into shock for a long period, right? Those are sort of extreme examples. Or suicidal could even be an extreme example of blending. You become blended with a part, you lose contact with self. Self isn't driving the bus anymore. The wounded part is, and that wounded part isn't present in reality. It's literally stuck in some old frozen moment in time and it's driving the bus with all those old beliefs and assumptions about reality that likely are untrue, hopefully are no longer true about the world being unsafe or people being unsafe, this kind of thing, the world being harmful, whatever the negative belief is. So, yeah, unblending and blending. So, you're blended with a part that's wounded. So, unblending is the thing that, like, I think that's to me what felt different. I think a lot of modalities have ways to unblend, but this is where I was getting stuck with my panic attacks. I would get so blended with a part of me that was panicked, a wounded part from the past, it would take over. And all of my tools were not working in the moment when it was taking over. Like later, once it was done, my tools were helpful, but I still, when I would get taken over, I didn't know how to get out of that. And yeah, for me, the practice of unblending, if I can just remind myself, I'm out of self. This is just a wounded part that is freaking out. And I ask it to step back. I ask it to step out of my body and stop taking over, like the heart racing, the blurry vision. I ask it to step back and get in front of me and stop taking over my body so I can talk to it. And I explain to it, I can't be here for you if you're on top of me. If you take over, there's nobody home to support you. So I need you to back up. And there's several different ways that IFS like lays out for how to unblend. But practicing unblending, I feel like, is the same thing as like noticing you're triggered and getting out of trigger. Like, how do you get out of trigger? How do you, and for most of us, we all have our different ways that we get out of trigger, right? But when really big old trauma comes up, that's when you see people go, I need a new tool. What the heck? My typical strategies are not working. Um, yeah. So the other thing that's interesting about all of this is the self-care. Does anybody here struggle with self-care? I can only see a few faces. I was just chatting with a therapist friend about this dynamic of she was sharing with me that self-care used to make her feel so terrible she wanted to die. Like if she tried to implement self-care. And she was explaining, and this is a past experience, this isn't current for her because she's worked through this, but she was explaining to me how our wounded parts um, that learned self negation, right? Systems of self negation and self abandonment as survival strategies, right? So these wounded parts have learned to leave you, right? Self abandonment or self negation, negate your needs. My needs don't matter as much as other people's needs, people pleasing, whatever that looks like in your world, but however you leave yourself. But those early learned self negation and self abandonment survival strategies get triggered when we go towards self care. And for some people, it's so extreme that self care makes them feel like dying. That's a very extreme example. For her, it was like so uncomfortable. Um, but what was so impressive about talking with her about this was she was sharing that muscling through it, like just forcing yourself to take care of yourself, even when it feels horrible. And even when there's so much resistance in your system, right? Those are wounded parts coming forward going, no, it's dangerous. We can't take care of ourselves and put ourselves first. We have to manage everybody else, make sure everyone else has what they want. And even when they're all managed, we still can't take care of ourselves because it's just not safe, right? Um, those parts are speaking. If you override them and you just muscle through and say, with some other healthy parts are like, no, we're just going to take care of ourselves. Like, we need to rest now. We need to do this. We need to slow down, whatever it looks like. We need support. Muscling through just reinforces those old maladaptive patterns. So she was just saying, like, that's not helpful to encourage people to do that. And it's not helpful to do to yourself. It's just teaching yourself to do the same thing over and over again, which is like bypass what's really going on for you. So her suggestion, which I thought, really rang true for me, was work with what the parts that are resistant to the self-care. That's where the work is. There's parts that are wanting your attention. Whenever there's resistance in your system, it's a wounded part talking, saying, "Hey, I'm over here. I'd really like some attention." Um, so yeah, I thought that was just so exciting to explore about self-care because it feels like that is such a big part of being a spiritual seeker is figuring out self-care and how to be present and respond to yourself and take care of yourself and take care of your community and your family. And yeah, how do we do that when there's so much resistance in the system? And it seems like it's really common, that kind of resistance. Yeah. Um, I'm going to pause there and just see if there's any comments or questions. I have some other stuff I can share too, but I feel like that was a lot of talking. I'd love to hear what people have to say.
I have a question if nobody else does. Can you give us some examples of self-care
Hmm.
that brought up that feeling of wanting to die in your friend?
Mm. Uh, for her, she was just talking about anything basic, even it looks different for everybody, right? For one of her things was like feeding herself, figuring out how to eat was like such a foundational level of self-care, right? Like nourishment. Do I deserve nourishment? Do I deserve prioritizing my own nourishment? But for me, it's looked like other things like resting, right?
Hmm.
Like not just working all day, always keeping busy. I've really been learning how to rest. But what's interesting to watch is like, I think I used to have a bigger resistance to self-care, and now self-care is pretty easy. And I wasn't focused on this in the same way that she was. But I noticed there's not much resistance in my system to doing it at this point. But I think I did work with so many wounded parts that were related to that resistance. A lot of like self-sabotage and a lot of self-harming parts, Um, there was a lot of parts inside of me that I found that were hurting me. That's like what they thought their job was, because they were so wounded. Yeah, yeah. Does
Yeah,
that answer your question?
it does, yeah.
What
Thank
does
you.
it mean? What does it mean for you?
Well, I've also had to learn to take time out for myself, give myself time to just, I hardly ever sit down to just watch something, watch a movie or anything like that, for example, unless I'm with a friend. But then I'm doing it for their sake as much as mine. So then I never just, it's hard for me to just give to myself of my time. And nourishment, I have no problem with. Nourishment, I'm good with that. Giving myself things that I love is also been a challenge. And I think I finally overcame that obstacle last year. Last year, I finally figured out that it's okay for me to give myself things that I love. Make my house beautiful, make my yard beautiful, things like that, which I realized I had not done before. because I didn't feel I was worth it. I didn't feel like worthy of it. But somehow something triggered in me last year, and I suddenly felt that I was worthy of it, and it was okay to give myself things that I loved.
Yay. I love hearing
Yay!
that.
Yeah,
Celebrate that. That's such a big victory.
yeah. Thank you,
Mhm. Anybody else have any comments or questions or?
Neely.
Yeah, hi. I can share a little bit. I'm in the middle of a journey of healing from childhood trauma myself, and working both with a therapist and with some spiritual methods. And one of the things for me that comes up whenever I do self-care, because for many, many years I was completely disconnected and worked myself, to exhaustion, and then came home and took care of the kids and everybody else's needs before my own. And now I notice that I am doing self-care, but there are two emotions that come up immediately when I go into it, and it's guilt and shame. And it's almost like an inner voice that's like, you don't deserve that.
Mm,
You're selfish for doing it, even if, I just took 5 minutes to grab a coffee. So, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Millie. So when that comes up sometimes, you said, is that correct? Not, is that consistent for you or just on
Very consistent. Very consistent.
so what's your experience of it then? Is it does that stop you from doing it?
Um, it doesn't stop me from doing it anymore. I sit with the shame and the guilt, and I tell myself I have shame and guilt in me. I am not
Yeah.
shame and guilt. And
Yeah.
sometimes it helps. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like reparenting, right? You're just talking to yourself and letting yourself
Yeah.
know it's okay.
Yeah.
That's great. I think it's helpful to find out what works, and share that with each other, I think is why I'm asking those questions. Like what works for you and what works for other people and overcoming that, and or tending to those parts.
Right.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. You want to go on, Karen? Continue
Yeah,
on.
sure. March on.
March on.
Um, yeah, self-care. It's a neat way that parts work shows up. I mean, there's lots of different little nooks and crannies to explore. Um, would it be fun to explore some of your wounded parts so you can make a cute little list? I love having a list. Um, sound fun? Whee! Let's
Yeah.
find our wounded parts. Um,
Raise your hands if you want to do that. Who wants to do that? Okay.
yeah.
Benjamin
Okay.
West,
Oh, look, Landon raised his
London. Okay.
hand. Okay, great. Um, well, one way to
Oh,
check
London,
in.
Adam too. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Ken. One way to check in is the first exercise we did, which is just tracking body sensations, right? Like where do you feel self in the body? What's it like? And what's not self? What's that like? Usually anything constrictive, anything painful, anything that's like not open and expansive, like I was saying earlier, is often a wounded part that's trying to talk to you. So I've been dealing with health challenges for the last, I don't know, 2.5 years ish. And the first 6 months of that, I was like in bed, like not so mobile for a long time. And I think it was a lot of this trauma, old trauma coming up to be worked with. And every time I would work with a physical sensation, I would find a part. And I don't know if this is always true, but I really have the experience. And when I work with other people, I have this experience that When there's physical sensations or stuck emotions, there's usually a part that wants to talk and get heard. So one of the ways we can do that, right, is when we notice there's stuckness or there's uncomfortability, you can stop and just say, "Who's there? What do you want me to know?" Right? And you could just start talking to this part. And IFS has a formal process, but just practicing listening and empathy and kindness in a conversation, like I thought that was a really good example that Nilly was just giving of noticing the emotions that come up, and then how do you comfort those parts and not become them? Doing that practice of unblending so you can talk and have that conversation. So right now, we're going to explore another angle at how to begin that conversation, which is here's my prompt for you. What do you feel shame, embarrassment, humiliation about, either in yourself or other people in your world? Shame, embarrassment, humiliation. There might be other words you might use. What do you not want to be more than anything? What is it that you cannot be that maybe you are or are not? That's just a fun little exercise to like check in and say, what am I really ashamed of? What am I really embarrassed about? What do I feel humiliation over? Right? It might be really old stuff, it might be current stuff. Um, what's really funny is that like in this, like here I am talking, like, I mean, Ken's like responding a little bit, but I'm talking silently. And a little bit of what comes up is shame around over talking.
Right.
It's like I'm just talking to myself over here. Are you guys even listening? Um,
Yeah,
so
I have
that's
that. Yeah.
you have that.
Yeah, I have that too. Sometimes I think I overtalk and overexpress myself. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a wounded part I've never spoken to. I can see her, like when I start feeling into that, I see her. I'm pretty small,
Hmm.
and the people around me are like giving me that funny look, you know?
Right.
And I'm not sure why they're looking at me funny, but I think I must have done something funny. Yeah, so make a little list for yourself if things come up. And you're welcome to share them too if you want to share them now or just write them down. And then see if you can just find some empathy and sweetness, like even if it's just holding your heart or putting your hand on your heart, and just like acknowledging that's a tender part. And that part, usually when there's shame and embarrassment and humiliation, that part gets exiled, right, from our system. Like we don't want to be that. Doesn't mean it doesn't show up sometimes, right? Still in our life. It might show up currently or it might have shown up in the past. Yeah, shame. I guess Nilly mentioned shame earlier too, right? Like shame's another good one. Yeah, so see if you can say hello to those parts and let them know. Okay, this is where it gets good. There's the one that's literally being exiled, right? Like for me, it's the overtalker. There's someone overtalking. There's another part. It's not self that's judging the overtalker. There's another part that's like, don't overtalk. That's bad. Does that make sense? There's two parts. I mean, sometimes there's like five in a conflict, but that's a conflict inside of me. I have an overtalker. So it's like, burp, 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 burp. And then I have a part that's judging the overtalker that's like, don't overtalk. And sometimes when the overtalker takes over and I overshare and overtalk in a group, then I feel the judge come forward too. And as a good therapist friend of mine was telling me, she's like, When you're really like in an inner struggle, you usually have 2 or 3 parts involved that are fighting. That's when things get really good. So when you're dealing with stuff like shame and embarrassment and humiliation, um, you're asking who's, what am I ashamed of and who's ashamed of it? Yeah, does that resonate for anybody?
Mhm. Definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
West, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to share. Yeah, it's resonating for me too. And I have found the question, how do you feel towards that part, to be really helpful to expose, right? Like if
Mm.
there's the shame, or like to take Neely's example, like, okay, I'm taking care of myself and I feel shame about that. How do I then feel about the shame? I feel embarrassed about the shame or whatever, I'm just guessing. But yeah, how do I feel about or towards that part can reveal other parts that are in the dynamic.
So juicy. Yeah, that's really, I'm really grateful you brought that up because that's one of those phrases that when you go through the IFS process, you're constantly asking that question because the whole process is built around how do you stay in self and be self talking to the parts. And then you have got to track when have I been taken over by another part that's judging. It's called a concerned part that's judging the part that I'm trying to work with. And the way that you get asked that, find out is how do I feel towards this part? Am I feeling compassion, love, openness, kindness, curiosity? Oh, I love curiosity. If you're not feeling curious about the part that you're talking to, you're blended with another part, which is what you're pointing to. And that is the question that stays through the whole process. How do you feel towards this part? How do you feel towards this part? How do you feel towards this part? And I kind of feel like it's like that's that's how IFS lives in me. Is like when something comes up, how am I feeling towards it? Is there curiosity? Is there openness? Or I mean, like when I first started doing this work, like I don't know, does everybody say this? Like you feel like, oh, I've been doing work for so long. Things should be pretty clean in here. Then you like
Yeah.
do a new thing and you're like, wow, I feel like I'm just learning how to walk. Like I feel like I have a diaper on and I haven't figured out the world yet. And when I like felt like I opened up the IFS box, it was like there were so many parts that were like yelling for my attention. They were in line and they were fighting with each other and they were all mad at each other and they're all like it was really kind of shocking, honestly, for me. It's like they found out there was a microphone and they could talk into it like a bunch of kids, and they were like, "Yeah, we have a lot to say. We hope you're listening." Anyhow, so that was yeah, this piece
Yeah.
of the internal fight is so significant, I think, in terms of mental health and healing.
Yeah. Neely has had her hand raised for a while.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Go ahead, Neely. You have to unmute.
I said, that's hilarious. I'm just laughing here about the kids fighting for the microphone.
Mm.
Um, I have a question. Do you consider, or not you, does the IFS system considers all of those voices as your own voice? Because according at least to my therapist, which is one of a million, some voices are kind of like embedded in you. Let's say you had an abusive parent, which is my case. Then I hear my abusive parent's voice judging me in my head. And the question is, am I hearing it? Am I giving it the parent's voice because it's a rejected part of me, or is it really some sort of an imprint that I've had?
I love this question. This is so juicy on so many levels. Thank you, Nilly. Were you complete in your question?
I
Or
am
Jeff?
complete.
That's so good. I feel like I want it to be like I want your question across the screen so I can look at the words. Um, I'm just so visual. I think that's a fantastic question. And one thing I'll say is that every therapist was trained in something else before they got trained in IFS. So my experience is that they all, you know what I mean? Like that the story that your therapist has about the voices that people hear is probably their foundational story. And then IFS has a framework on top of it, if that makes sense. Um, so I imagine she's pulling more from her own training, that kind of thing. Because IFS's framework is not, it's not like, oh, this is what's true about the whole system. It's more like, um, it's not trying to be a psychological map of the psyche that's accurate. It's more just creating this sort of like loose framework to understand the parts of us that get exiled, if that makes sense. So when there's different voices, I think the great thing to ask is like to do your own inquiry about it and see what you find. And I've had similar questions, and in my experience, the voice of my parents has become a part that's me that now is now talking inside of me. And like, it's sometimes harmful, right? That voice in myself, if the situation was harmful. And I think it may not be either. And I don't actually, and to say what IFS says about it, I'm actually not sure if they're that definitive. I think that would be a great thing to ask someone who's deeper down the rabbit hole than I am. But I have seen that a lot where people like there's a mother inside or there's like it's the characteristic of whatever the voice was that you heard that appears. What's the thing I was going to say about this though is that um, the voice inside often becomes a part. Oh, this is what's so interesting. Okay, this is what got brought up by your question. There's a lot of layers to this. There's a question you can ask your parts is how much of this is yours? And are you willing to let go of what's not yours? And that's kind of related to what you're saying. For my parts that have picked this up from someone else, you know, and that's like, when does it become yours, right? Like, when have you repeated it so many times to yourself? When, okay, well, let me break it down a little bit. Those two questions I think are significant and important. How much of this is yours? And are you willing to let go what's not yours, right? That I've started to ask all my parts that when I start talking to them, and it feels like somebody else's voice, and my lineage story, anything my grandmother or mother or whatever, or father, just down the line, I heard other people say or think. They often even say that about disease that's hereditary, and you start talking to the parts that have diabetes or the parts that have heart disease, this kind of thing, you can ask them those questions. And I've had them like my parts drop the weight. Like this isn't mine. I would love to get rid of this. And they drop it like a big fat weight. And it's so
Wow,
cool. And
that's so
sometimes
cool.
they're like, what? I can let go of this, and it's so confusing because now it's kind of become such a deep part of me, right? Like some of the pieces for me that are so like have I built my identity around them are way harder for those parts to let go of. And even for multiple parts, like then I ask the question, how many other parts have taken on the story, and taken on like this piece from someone else? And I start expanding the search. Okay, so there's that end of it, but then there's the end of when does something become yours? Like all trauma is this way, right? Somebody else in the environment has a story about reality and they engage with you in some manner and they're telling you about how the world is, right? Or what they think of you or whatever it is. And then you ingest that somehow, right? And if it's too much for your system, then you have this sort of wounded part out of the experience. Yeah, so anyway, that intersection is just a really interesting, nuanced area that I'm sure you all have a lot to say about. So I will stop talking.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
no, it's
love
great,
that.
Karen.
Yeah, that is awesome. And Kent has his
That's
hand
awesome.
up too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, when you were talking about the different parts inside talking, like the overtalker and then, another part judging the overtalker, it made me think of a song by an artist, a Welsh artist named Ren. He has this brilliant song and brilliant video. The song is called Hi Ren. The artist is called Ren. I highly recommend them. I put them in the chat. It's about different parts inside of him talking to each other. It's so incredible. So yeah, I highly recommend
Cool.
everybody watching that.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. That was it. Landon?
Yeah, I had like a kind of question about it's a bit different than the last thing you were talking about, but like so ever since I was a kid, I kind of have made these two almost like characters or parts of myself. And it's like I call one of them day and the other night. So I just use them to kind of like identify what parts of myself are like more me and the parts that are just like trauma. And I still like to this day I still work with it in like kind of like concept way. Like I know that it's kind of bad to get like too attached to it. But for instance, like I see night as like my shadow side, and if I'm going through something really heavy and I just like look within and I see night just like screaming and crying, and it's taken like months and months to get to a point where I can actually like be compassionate towards like night in my head and try to like just get her to calm down. And eventually my goal is to like slowly develop it to the point where I have like the self-discipline to see that the emotions are always going to be like available to me. Like they're always tools. I just don't have to be so attached to them. And I guess my question relating to that would be like, how would you identify parts of it, like parts of your inner psyche as being like positive or negative? Because I've kind of like used that polarity as like a way to tell for me, just like inside, which is beneficial and which is like not when I say like positive and negative, I know that like the negative parts are not something you can like cut out of yourself. Like you can't like cut out the fear or like literally like permanently get rid of them. It's just more like for me finding ways to like work with it and develop it. And yeah, I guess so. That's just my question, like positive or negative and how it would apply to that.
So how to identify the different parts that are positive and negative?
Yeah, because like I know there's a lot of inner parts of me, like how you were saying that there's just so many different conflicting voices. And
Mhm.
like you said, if you're curious about them, if you feel like yourself being curious about one of the parts, then
Yeah.
that's almost like a lodestone. Like you know that you're not blending with one of the parts, you're like unblended if you feel curious or compassionate.
Yeah.
And I think that would correspond to feeling like a more positive feeling versus something
Mm,
like would be more negative as like you're mad at this part or you just want to like hurt it.
mm. Gotcha. hmm Yeah, so there's two different things there. There's who's driving the bus, and in IFS they call it the seat of consciousness. So in this moment, are you sitting in self, or it's either self or it's a wounded part? But there are positive parts, like let's say your executive functioning part, right? Your part that like knows how to get shit done. That's a healthy part, right? That part doesn't I mean, that part could have wounds, but um, there are lots of different parts that like take over and run things for you that are healthy functioning parts, right? Wounded parts are the ones that are experiencing some sort of pain and constriction, and you might call those negative parts, right? Like that might be your night. Um, and those can take over or not. Like anyone can be driving the bus, right? It's either self, it could be some other part, like self's driving the bus, and other positive parts are coming in and out. Like your comedian comes forward, right? When you're in front of a group, And now you're being funny and you're connecting, and there's no necessarily like there's no wound, there's no exile related, there's no wounded parts related to that comedian in this moment, right? And that's happening. But then something happens that triggers a wounded part, and the wounded part comes in, takes over, and now you might experience like that sort of negative part driving. So I'm just trying to distinguish those two things of like who's in the seat of consciousness from wounded parts that you're exploring, which sounds like the nighttime parts. But your question is, how do I differentiate between them, between day and night?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said makes a lot more sense. Like if I see um that it's more of like the analogy of physically being wounded, or
Mm,
if you take that and say like this part of my psyche is like mentally or emotionally wounded. Um, and I guess like to follow up on that, how would you do you think that once you like obviously I don't think you were saying like that you can like get rid of those voices inside. Like how do
mm,
you deal with them? Or like how do you develop them and kind of like evolve them to stop so they're not frozen in time anymore and they can like
yeah,
catch up and start being like living with you?
gotcha. Yeah, it's a great question. There's lots of different ways to do that. I mean, I can give you like I was saying earlier, I'm not trying to give a breakdown of the whole process because the IFS process is a whole thing. Um, right? Like the process itself is like, you know, 15, 20 steps that you go through, starting with grounding in self and making sure that self's the one who's trying to have the conversation with the part, not another part that's in a fight with that part, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and then you go through all these different steps to get to a healing with that. But a lot of it looks like empathy, connecting, like asking the part, I'd like to know what happened to you. What do you want me to know? Um, and going through a process. I'm also willing to share my cheat sheet on the whole process as well too. I think we have a link to that somewhere. Um, yeah, finding out what does it want to know? What does it want from you? But the state of empathy and like when you sit in self and you talk to the part and you can unblend enough to have that conversation, which is hard to do when you're triggered, right? It's easier to do when it's not up, to like call that part forward, talk to it, find out what it wants you to know, find out what it needs. And there's some stages where you could reimagine what happened to the part and ask the part if it would like to experience that event in a new way. And then there's sort of a healing ritual that you go through where you ask the part if it's willing to let go of its negative beliefs. But all of this is grounded in being in self, right? Does that make sense? And not being blended with other wounded parts while you're talking to the part and practicing unblending from the part. Sometimes when we're dealing with big trauma, when we access a wounded part, like whenever I would talk to the parts that were in panic, it was really intense, you know? Sometimes I needed other people to hold space for me. Sometimes I could do it on my own. And I would have to keep unblending from the part. The part would take over when I would visit it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I feel like I'm kind of like blended with the part of me that is like bad at public speaking. 'Cause I feel just because I
That's
feel
great.
like
I
I
think
don't know,
you're
I
doing
get kind
great.
of thank you. I just get kind of like shaky and stuff when I
Yeah.
talk, but anyway.
Yeah. I
So
think a lot
thank
of us have that part. I think
you. Mhm.
that's a common one. You guys have that too? Get a little nervous when you're talking. Yeah, thanks, Landon. Did you want to
Yeah.
say anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thank you.
Well, I also just want to reflect this daytime, nighttime thing is super cool. And I love how you are, it sounds like you've been in your own process that's been emerging, figuring out how to have empathy and compassion for this nighttime. And I think it's so cool.
Yeah, I see it as like those two parts are something that is it's not just like in this lifetime, they're just like temporary positive and negative like experiences. I kind of see them more as like principles inside myself. So like
Cool.
after I'm gone from here and I like passed on to larger life,
Yeah.
like the day and night, the positive and negative of my mind, my emotions, and just like my everything will still be there. And so just like trying to just come to terms with the fact that they're like eternal principles and that I can start working on them now and like develop. I mean, I've probably been working on them for a long time, but just like developing them in that sense is helpful to me.
Yeah, awesome.
So Karen, I have the books here if you want me to show them.
Oh yeah, show them off.
Yeah, here's the one that Karen was mentioning at the beginning.
Yeah, there's a workbook and there's a book.
Yeah, this is the one you mentioned, Self-Therapy by Jay Early.
Yeah, the
And
workbook actually is a different author, right?
yeah, and here's the Self-Therapy.
Bonnie
Um,
White.
yeah, it is by Bonnie Weiss, yes. The Self-Therapy Workbook.
Yeah. This workbook is so juicy. It's full of all these exercises. Like if you want to dive in, it's great to read the book too, but I just got the workbook and started doing the exercises and doing the practices, and they kind of I think that'd be a great place for you to start, Landon, if you're curious about how to work with those parts.
Right.
Cool. Has anybody else in the group explored that? I know West and Kent have, we were in a little study group exploring that together. Has anyone else explored IFS?
I think Neely had, right?
No,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you
that's
didn't?
I think that's the only one that I didn't explore, working on
Okay.
my panic attacks, etc.
Mm,
Mhm.
okay, cool. I'd also be curious to hear from um, Kent and BJ and Wes, since they have all this experience with it. What takeaways you guys have had from your experience with it, if that's interesting.
Yeah, and Benjamin raised his hand too.
Oh, great.
Oh yeah, I don't know how to raise the hand on the thing, so I raised my literal hand. But
Yeah, that's fine.
so this makes me think of Eckhart Tolle
Mm,
and Michael Singer,
mm,
and just reading like The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer or listening to Eckhart Tolle's talks is like Tolle had his awakening when he had this conversation with himself. He's like, I can't stand myself or I can't live with myself. And he was like, who is this I and who is this myself that I can't live with? And he just dawned on him like, oh, I'm not that voice. So I think this is a great way of like digging in there. I am not familiar with this. I have heard, I worked with like a holistic therapist and we looked at my younger self and we walked down the road and like I took him away from that and all that. So I imagine that's related. And so maybe I have experienced it but didn't know the terminology. But my understanding of self is it's the wordless one. Because, like, even me talking right now, like, I'm not the voices in my head. I'm not these emotions. I'm not this body, even, but more like what Landon was saying, like, consciousness that lives on, the one that's the witness, the one that's the observer. That's the thing that continues on. And that really has no emotion or no thoughts. Like, but the mind is so tricky that we identify with this thinking thing, right? And all these voices. And anyone were like, yeah, that's me now. Oh, because nope, that's not me anymore, right? And I could see just like putting another layer on top and then putting another layer on top. And then I wonder, maybe even working with this, I might trick myself into, oh, the one talking right now, this is the me, and that one's not. Um, so like I guess I'm worried about putting another layer on, like that this is the one. Now I'm just coming up with a new voice to identify with. But I can step back, but it's a great way I think of making space between that so that like there's some distance so I can observe that part and observe those thoughts more from an impartial standpoint versus like involved in it and identifying with it. And then that's me. And now I'm sinking into the story and I'm not, the self's not driving the bus anymore. Right. Um, so I'm kind of like thinking out loud and trying to connect it from what I've learned from the readings. But I guess I've kind of been doing this work as like stepping back. I'm the observer. I'm not in here. I'm none of those. I've caught myself a couple times and been like, oh, you tricky. That is tricky because it'll try to slip me back in to that when it's like, no, I'm the one observing. And I can be like, oh, I get to play this character now. Like, and I wanted to say, Landon, like I used to be very shy. And I still feel the energy now when I speak, but I teach math and very judgmental students, right? They hate math or like, you know, so you got all this energy and this judgment kind of coming at you. So I've gotten a lot better at it, but I still feel the energy in my body. I don't think that ever goes away, but I reinterpret that energy. Instead of being nervousness or shyness, I reinterpret it as excitement. Like this energy revs up in me for a purpose so it can go out. Like it's undirected energy that needs to flow somewhere. That's the way I interpret anxiety too, as well. It's energy that's revving up inside of me that has some place to go. I just need to let it go out.
Yeah.
So thanks.
I like that a lot. I think I kind of overlayer that excitement with like just self-judgment. And so I kind of like it bottles up inside and I get literally like shaky. But I do notice like when I was at the gathering, like where I met West, there was a lot of times where I did feel that excitement and it just came through as me like smiling or just like honestly it wasn't as bad. I just think I like today I didn't meditate very much, so I do kind of feel not very balanced, but I do like that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and thanks for listening, everyone. I don't know if it made any sense.
No, it did. It did. I totally understood. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Landon. Yeah, I've been experiencing that for a lot of my life too, that shakiness you were talking about. So I totally relate to that. Karen, do you want to pick it up?
Nilly's got her hand
Oh,
raised.
yeah, Neely. Yeah, right. Yes.
Yeah, just one little thing that Benjamin said now when you were reflecting on Eckhart Tolle and the observer and who is this I feel like people who are doing the spiritual work alongside some self inquiry work, I feel like we're constantly going through almost like a zoom lens of a camera, right? So at one moment you are the observer and you can see all and you can, see that those emotions are not you. And then the zoom changes and you are inside the person again and you're feeling all those emotions at full speed. And then you go back again. So it's a really interesting. I wonder if as we continue evolving in our spiritual understanding and spiritual kind of not realization, if we stay longer at that edge of the focus as being the observer or more the I am rather than the little I that suffers essentially. And one last thing that I want to say about all of that. Um, I want to say that on one hand, all of those self-inquiry methods are wonderful, but we need to really still pay attention to the human, the little I that has wounds and suffers, and to really heal the wounds rather than bypass them by saying, I am the observer. Yeah. End of transmission.
Hmm. Thank you, Neely. West.
Yeah, I'm excited. I have some things to say. Um, yeah, partly started percolating with Karen's invitation, but then also, yeah, in response to Benjamin and yeah, definitely in response to Neely, like I really resonate with that, like the balance that I feel like you're calling forward, Neely, in terms of um, not identifying necessarily with those parts, but then also like I think we can like spiritualize that as an idea and like have, for myself, I'll also speak for myself. Like I know that I can have a part that's like posing as my true self or whatever, that's saying, oh, but that's not you, and but then I can notice like a sort of disassociation with what's arising rather than like what I notice my true self, the relationship with something that arises that isn't me. There's a welcoming, there's like and that's that quality of welcoming feels to me like my go-to panacea at this moment in my life. Like that's just what the balm that I apply to everything is, like just welcome it. Just welcome that. That's welcome. What just arose, that's welcome. You are welcome to be here. You judgment part, you are so welcome to be here right now. Or frustrated part, you have a place here too. You are so welcome to be here. Um, and through the welcoming, for me, what happens is I automatically transcend it because if I am welcoming it, I'm larger than it. And so there's like the work of unblending and not being caught as that part kind of happens on its own. But anyway, that's a practice that works really well for me at this point in my life. And of course, the things that are our go-tos change. So it may just be the flavor that I need right now, and it may not be like the be all end all or whatever, but it really works well for me right now. Yeah, and I wanted to also, while you were speaking, Benjamin, like the piece about like how we become identified was really called forth for me, and I put a quote in the chat that's like one of the classic, just like mic drop raw quotes. So this is from session 4 of the Raw Contact Raw. Says, the law of one, though beyond the limitations of name, as you call vibratory sound complexes, may be approximated by stating that all things are one, that there is no polarity, no right or wrong, no disharmony, but only identity. All is one, and that one is love, light, light, love, the infinite creator. So what I take that to mean is like there is only one. There's no separation, but there is identity, right? Like identity is our free will. We are free to identify as the annoying one, the pissed off one, the fabulous one, like whatever quality we're interested in the moment. It's part of our free will to identify as that, and then it can seem as though that's me. And I think that's part of the game, and part of the fun of 3D and like apparently living behind the veil. Um, so yeah, I think again, just it takes me back to the what really works well for me about the welcoming. It's like all the parts, all the identity is welcome. It's awesome. It's so cool. And when I'm in that welcoming way, it also is dissolving identity at the same time. So I'm like celebrating it and dissolving it. So those are some
Yeah.
thoughts.
All right, Kent has his hand up. So I'm going to speak. I don't see anybody else having their hand up. Yeah, that was beautiful, West. Thank you. I really totally resonate with all that. I want to comment on what Benjamin said, and I've been trying to think of how to do it because it's a little tricky. I think you were saying, Benjamin, that you feel that your true self is the capital S self. Am I right? And then, and then in this IFS work, we're talking about the lower S self, and then we're splitting that up into different parts, like the wounded parts and the protector parts and stuff like that. So that can be a little confusing if you're new to this material. And so what I wanted to say, I'm doing a course right now in NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming. And in there, the inventor of that, his name is Robert Fritz. He keeps saying over and over again that he's not claiming that the concepts are true or accurate or real, but if we work with them as if they were real, we can get the results that we are looking for. So you don't necessarily have to believe that we have these wounded parts inside, what do you call them again? The protector? What are they called? The parts? The protector, what's the wounded part called?
The exile.
The exile, yeah. The protector in the exile. So, yeah, you don't have to adopt that belief system, but if you work with it as if it were real, you may find that you get the results that you want and the healing that you want out of it. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you, Benjamin? Yeah. What do you think of that, Karen?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm actually I'm in response mode to what Wes shared.
Okay,
You know,
yeah,
like
yeah,
like
go
someone
ahead.
shares something and then someone else shares something else, and then I'm back over there and
Yeah,
you
okay,
say something new.
right. No,
But
go ahead.
do you want
No,
more
no,
response though on to what you're
no,
sharing?
no, it's okay, it's okay. I was just wondering
Um,
if it resonated with you. But
yeah.
yeah, no, you can respond to West. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say something quick that what was so neat about Wes saying she has this practice of welcoming whatever arises. Um, what I think is a really neat testament to that is, how you treat the people around you. Like the ability that you have to welcome what's arising in your own self is usually reflected in how you receive the people around you. And Wes and I have been besties for 17 years, almost, something like this. And in all the years that I have known West, I have never been around anyone who probably even has a fraction of the ability to welcome all my parts that West does. And not that she's perfect at it, but it was really interesting when you said that, West, because I was like, wow, that is, always think of it as empathy. So cute, you little heart. Um, but it's more than that. It's because you have been practicing this for so long. And I think it's also just maybe your natural way of being. I kind of imagine that you grew up, like came in doing this sort of welcoming your family, welcoming everything. And you've also had your own shadows around probably some of that too, is my guess. But anyhow, it really shines through because it's such an extraordinary gift to the people around you. And for those of us that have been around West, it's like you get close to her, it's like she doesn't even need to say anything. Like when she's in the space and I have a big thing come up that's really challenging for me, like I feel safer having her in the space. And you know what? It also extended to my parts work. When I was really dealing with some really, really intense stuff that was too much for me and actually too much for like myself to hold, when I would be like, in IFS, you're like, hey, you're trying to convince the part that you can hold it. And the part's like, no, no, you can't hold this. And you're like, no, I got it. I know I haven't been here before, but now I'm here and I'm the adult and I'm going to take care of you. And sometimes, anyhow, the point of the story is sometimes when my parts would be too overwhelming or too intense, I would take my West part, and West would come in. This is my nurturing part. She'd be the part that would hold everything, and I would take those little parts and I'd have them sit with West, and West would hold them, and it would be this most soothing thing in the universe for them. And it was just so sweet. Anyway, so I just wanted to say that because what a cool example of I feel like that's like your mastery. And I also imagine it's part of your incarnative gift or something. It feels like it's so easy for you or something.
Totally. I think I call that quality of myself my superpower, but also my kryptonite. Like I
Yeah.
have since I was a tiny person, I had to welcome everything that was arising, or I was just a puddle. So I just kind of had to.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
We have 5 minutes left. Do we need to wrap up or take more questions? Any more questions from anybody? Raise your hand. No? All right.
I just wanted to add, I like what you said, Karen, about West. And the first time I met West, I had heard her talk about on a podcast something about how like she was so good at holding eye contacts for long periods of time and doing it like for a while. And the first time I met her, she was like looking into my eyes so intensely and so like purely that it almost like shook me, like it was a bit too much. Like I was like, whoa. But then like I got used to it very quickly. And it was so like how you described it was so like just compassionate and welcoming. And I really like that. I agree with it. So I kind of do want to start using like my own little West part.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that
It's
idea.
so
That's
great.
amazing. Party favor for everyone. Take me home with you. You
Yeah.
get one. You get one.
It's really, I think it is a really great party favor, like if you don't know West, uh, you might use something else, but like what's the most comforting and soothing thing you can think of? And then sometimes it's like people even will call in, archangels, whatever it is, but you can call in things into your system to hold those ouchy parts even when you're overwhelmed. I think that's a great one. But that's co-regulation, right? Like that's when like for me when I have a panic attack, the first thing I do is look to see who's around that I can lean on. And like Wes is often my first choice of humans if I can get a hold of her and she's available. My husband is also another choice for me. It's like that's what co-regulation is, right? It's like, oh, other nervous systems help us regulate. So when you're overwhelmed by things, going to other people is the first thing, especially when you can't. And that's not the way everybody's wired, right? Some people really need to be alone when they're overwhelmed. That's that.
That's that. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, everyone can have their own West if they want.
Yeah. Right.
Well, I just appreciate everybody sharing and such a juicy conversation. And I really encourage everyone to check out self therapy if this interests you at all. And maybe we can put a link. Can we put a
Mhm.
link in the chat to our? Okay.
Oh, I didn't put a link to your website.
Oh yeah, I have a website too. So
Mhm.
there is inspiration to gather people to practice together, and so that's if you explore it. Um, somaticexpansion.com is our my husband Alexander and I's website, and we'll probably have you can get on our mailing list, and I'm sure it'll go out to TOTOH community as well if you're on TOTOH's mailing list. If we put something together, but we'd love to have like weekend retreats where people who have read self therapy and are practicing can come and work together, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then you also do one-on-one sessions too, right?
Yeah, I do. I do. Yep.
You do it over the phone, like long distance?
Yes, but I tend to do more group stuff than anything. I really like
Yeah.
being in groups.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't, yeah. And I tend to do stuff in person with my friends. That's kind of my favorite thing.
Mm. Yeah.
But gathering
Yeah.
groups is the bomb. Yeah. And I think that's that co-regulation piece I'm talking about too. It's just like getting together in group and just what it's like to be here together tonight and talk to each other and hear other voices and
Yeah.
other stories. Yeah.
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 All
It's
right.
so helpful to share experience with one another. Thus, the purpose of this salon series, we're sharing the path. It's
Mm-hmm.
helpful to not do it alone.
Exactly. Well,
Thank you
thank you,
so much.
everybody, and especially Karen.
Yeah.
That was a great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. All right.
Let's
Well,
take a moment to thank the invisible support that was with us.
Mm.
mhm.
Thank our guides and our allies. Thank our intuition. And thank you to those of Ra for being with us and guiding our studies, our learnings. And thank you always to the one infinite creator.
Yeah.
Amen.
Amen.
See y'all soon.
See you
Thanks,
all.
everybody.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for coming. Thank you for coming.